What's up to all five of you watching? Welcome to my brain. I'm Meeks, and this is Words Are Hard. So, today I have a very special guest and friend. His name's Damani Felder. He is just an amazing wordsmith, and I can't wait for you guys to hear this conversation because we always just have the best intellectually stimulating conversations. So, without further ado, here is Damani Felder.
Hey Mika, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. You set the bar kind of high there, so now I'm going to have to make sure I'm extremely eloquent this time. I'll do my best.
Okay, sounds good. Well, you're just gonna make me look like not as good of a wordsmith as you because I'm actually quite delayed in my thinking. But anyway, so how have you? I'm super freaking awkward, dude. Thank you for putting up with this. I wanted to ask you, just give people some background. Actually, I want people to know who you are. I don't think a lot of people in my circle of influence, if you will, know who you are. So if you could just introduce yourself and let them know who you are, where you're from.
Yeah, so Damani Felder, I am currently in Houston, Texas. I'm the second oldest of nine kids. I was born in San Antonio and have bounced around ever since. Um, Something about me, I was homeschooled for all 12 years before I went to college. I went to Texas A&M University with a degree in marketing, graduated in 2014, and moved up to the Dallas-Fort Worth area where I was until I moved down this way. So a little bit about me is from a young age, my parents made education really the cornerstone of our development. They prided themselves on being linguistics experts of sorts, and their passion and zest for knowledge trickled down to us younger ones. So we actually have been striving to follow after their example as we've grown and matriculated and moved on to our current exploits here in Texas and around the country. So when I graduated from Texas A&M University, I moved to Dallas and I was working in sales at the time. And it was around that time that my awakening kind of began as far as my socio-political awakening of sorts, because there is a very poignant moment that we all reach when we get to the end of our collegiate years, where we're forced to grapple with the sometimes uncomfortable notion that we are going to be part of polite society, as it were, and that we need to be very much interested in those topics because they will begin to affect us directly. So, ever since I made that realization on my own, I began to be more and more invested in that space. And I took it upon myself to not just be a person who talks online, but a person who actually puts it into practice. So that's when I started my own YouTube channel actually in 2018 was the first time I released a video on YouTube. And then from then, just growing and building a network throughout various social media platforms. I currently am on 10 different social media platforms. And it's just really been a blessing to be able to speak my truth, to borrow the oft used phrase, and to really do my best to at least encourage others who may think similarly, or even more importantly, challenge those who may think differently than I do. And in so doing, I've also been able to challenge my own thought processes and learn how to defend what I do believe most adroitly, if you will. So that's a little bit about me. And now, I'm here in Houston. I've moved. This was my 29th, no, I'm sorry, 22nd move in my 29 years of life. So I'm used to just getting up and going wherever I'm supposed to be, and I'm happy to be here now. And more importantly, I'm happy to be here on your show. I'm looking forward to an extremely scintillating conversation.
For sure. Thanks. Thanks for letting us know that. I actually was on your Facebook the other day. You had put on your Facebook this video on your Facebook, but not on your Instagram, and it says, "This is me." And I had gone into about 6 minutes of it. You giving your, sharing your story. And I wanted to stop there because I, wanted you to say a little bit more about you on here without me knowing what you were already going to say. So, anyway, thank you for sharing that. And you said that you went to Texas A&M, right?
Yep,
Well,
I am.
want to give
Fighting that
this to
dragon
you.
class of 2014. I'll give you a
Well,
big, hey, whoop, and I got my
no,
ring.
I wore my UT ring specifically for this reason. Charlie, do you know that one website that goes to A&M's A&M's homepage?
Oh no,
All
I
right,
went to
here we go.
YouTube.
All right, now, go ahead, go for it.
All right. You know what it is, right, Charlie?
I actually don't.
Go to utrejects.com real quick
How
to
dare you? I feel like Greta
Wow,
Thunberg right now. How dare you?
it actually brings you there.
I love doing that to people. Okay, well, thank you for playing, Damani. So I wanted to give people a little bit of background on how we met too. So last year, not even last year, but last June, I went to a Police Lives Matter protest with our friend Savannah, and she had invited you to, just to go to the protest, to be there with us. And I'm showing the audience this picture of us, and you are there, like right in the background because you are quite tall, sir. How tall are you?
I'm 6'3".
6'3". So you can see Damani right there in the back. I wish I had like a pointer, but I don't. And that's where we met. Me and Damani met at the Police Lives Matter protest where I had been waving my sign that says "Love thy neighbor." I didn't want to show that I was on either side, though I was siding with the police. I just wanted to be a person that was basically unifying, and maybe not even myself, but just like put up something that is unifying. And I believe, and I know you do too, Damani, that that's Jesus, that no one else can unify people and flawed people unless it's Jesus. There's no one else. But so that's how we met. And I wanted to ask you, Damani, have you always been conservative, or did you have more of a liberal way of living before you started becoming a political commentator and coming to your realization that what you value is actually more conservative values?
Good question. Because when I was coming up, while I was in College Station attending college, one of the things that I actually was becoming more and more susceptible to was the social justice causes or the progressivism culture that really has swept much of the nation at this point. And you can look back in my own personal Facebook, even, I believe it was back in 2013, I was actually on the side of Trayvon Martin back when I did not know all my information. All that to say that while I was raised in a household where both my parents were conservatives and who were very much aware of their political landscape, what I'm grateful for is that they did not essentially force their views upon us younger ones. We were aware of them, but we were never forced to submit to them per se. A lot of that awareness about politics really does come from that lived experience that we all have, or that we all will go through at one point in time or another. So when I was there in school, siding with Trayvon Martin and saying that college should be free and all this other stuff, what I'm most grateful for is I actually had some friends of mine at the time, and even they're still friends to this day, who were bold enough to encourage me to look at things from a different point of view. And that's something that I think a lot of people are not prepared to do or unwilling to do. That's a reason why in almost every one of my YouTube videos that I produce, at the very end, there's actually an audio excerpt from Gil Scott Heron when he made his 1970s speech, "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised." And one of the most poignant lines of that soliloquy, if you will, is when he says, "The first revolution is when you change your mind about how you look at things and see if there might be another way of looking at things that you have not been shown. The revolution will not be televised," and he goes on from there. But I find that line very interesting because I actually lived that myself. And ever since I was confronted with information that I initially was rejecting out of hand, when I did my due diligence to understand that I had been misled by the mainstream media machine, as many people are, I could not, in good faith, continue to go down a path of misinformation simply because it was most socially acceptable, or simply because it would get me the accolades that I desired. Anyone who is a conservative knows that it is actually arguably the largest counterculture movement ever at this point in time. And being part of that counterculture movement does come with its own difficulties. There are so many things that the average conservative has to put up with that the average leftist does not. But in that challenge really is bred perseverance and diligence. Because if you really do believe in what you espouse at this point as a conservative, then you are going to have to put in the work. And working is not a terrible thing. It's actually one thing that I would argue separates many of those on the right from those on the left, is that many people on the right are willing to work. while many on the left are looking for any way to get a handout or to get some sort of assistance where they do not have to put in that effort. So I've had a coming of age, I would say, over these last almost 8 years now. I can't believe it's been that long. I'm kind of feel really old when I say that. But being on this journey personally and seeing how it's affected other people, now I just feel that it is of paramount importance for those of us who are amassing somewhat of a following to be able to turn around and help others to come to their own political awakenings, whatever way, shape, or form they may come, and then encourage them to actually speak boldly in their own forums. Because when we grow, we all grow together.
Mhm.
And I'm very much against the notion of political celebrity, wherein there is a select class of political elites, be that individuals on the right or on the left, who, by virtue of their work, have become so almost caricaturized themselves that they fail to really make personal human connections anymore. So all that to say, that's part of why when you invited me to come on, I was more than happy to, because there's some individuals, unfortunately, on the right or the left, who would choose only to go where they stand to gain something tangible from it.
Mhm.
And my goal has always been to do whatever I do, and I pride myself on doing it for free. I'm not asking people to pay me anything, or I'm not selling a book or a T-shirt. It's not about that. Conservatism and patriotism should always and have always been free before in ideal. It has not been free in what one has had to give up to attain those ideologies and those values that we cling to today. So all that to say that that's kind of a little bit more about me and my thought process and kind of how I came to where I am today. But I want to mainly serve as just an inspiration to other people that you can do it. I've taught myself how to do what I do, and I'm very proud of what I do, and I enjoy it at the same time. And I think the more people we can get to actually realize that this is the way to go, that if you can hold true to your convictions, you can realize success and impact other people's lives, then I think that we'll be in a better position, as we continue to go into the future.
Definitely, definitely. And you mentioned that your political awakening was back in 2013, right?
Yep.
And it was when Trayvon Martin had died. And so you said that you had some friends who, just talked to you about what had happened, and that kind of sparked a different way of thinking in your mind. And I want to know what was said to you, or what hit you to think about it differently. Like, why did your thinking shift?
Well, really, it was their approach. The way they approached me says everything about them and the way they chose to engage in an arguably volatile situation that we were in, even back in 2013. What they did, instead of necessarily browbeating me, was they chose to simply ask questions. And asking questions is sometimes the most effective way to peel back the layers of one's own ideological onion. The more questions you ask, you're not making any accusations, but you're in an interesting way, sort of forcing the other person to continue to substantiate whatever claims they've made in the past.
Mhm.
So they asked me, well, did you read the autopsy report for Trayvon Martin? Did you know about the circumstances around the fact that the police were called to that apartment complex where George Zimmerman was that night almost once a day for more than a year at that point? Were you aware of that climate? Were you aware of the, the malfeasance that Trayvon and, even others were involved in around that area around that time? And the more questions that were asked around that, the more I was forced to confront the reality that my views had largely been shaped for me by the mainstream media powers that be. So that's why it is of paramount importance now that we encourage those who speak boldly, either on the right or the left, to at least be able to have the mental acuity to back up whatever they are claiming, because there is a very fine line, and sometimes a very blurred line, between what one's idea and perception are and what reality actually is.
Totally. Totally. And it's interesting that you mentioned that too, because anytime that I've engaged with my peers, either on social media or with friends out in the real world, and I talk politics with them, and most of the time they lean more left. I think that that's just what has been popular for decades. And so when I engage in these conversations with my peers, I just see so many fallacies that come from uh, Democratic leaning people because while I'm trying to have an argument with them, or more so like a civil discussion and just, say what I think, what I believe is true based on facts, they tend to be geared towards anger if you disagree with them, or they tend to put you in this, they compartmentalize you and put you in this box of like, oh, this person's a conservative, so I'm going to assume that they're hateful and don't care about people, they're not compassionate. And any time that I've tried to, you know give my point online, most of the time people end up calling you names, and then that's how they get you, or they think that they get you, is just by calling you names, calling you a bigot, saying that you are a race traitor. I've been called before, all these other things. And why why do you think that people on the left are more concerned with calling people names as opposed to really just listening, trying to understand, and still disagreeing? Like, why do you think that that is the popular way to go about a civil disagreement?
Well, it's because there's no any sort of ad hominem attack that is lobbied against you by someone who disagrees with you is in a way a tacit admission of their own ignorance. The reason I say that is because when you are, like what you said, coming at it from a standpoint of actually using factual information as opposed to emotions, when you're doing that and when you still can't get through to someone, that is because they refuse to operate on the same mental wavelength as you. So if they have already decided that their emotions are going to be the bedrock of any ideology whatsoever, then at that point you're almost at an impasse already, because you can't have a positive and a positive side of a battery. It's going to repel each other, and I see that very frequently happening with conservative or conservative versus liberal political discourse today, because people are not even on the same wavelength to where they could even be attracted to that conversation. And I will argue that sometimes it does happen on the right as well, where there are different tacks that can be taken than what are actually taken. And that also leads to deepening the divide, as it were. But when you have those attacks lobbied, those personal attacks, what I find very interesting about a lot of those is that typically they have nothing to do with the subject matter of the argument or dispute whatsoever. Typically, they have everything to do with one's appearance or one's socioeconomic status or one's ethnic
Mhm.
group or so on and so forth.
Mhm.
And that is because those are very, very easy targets for the small minded.
Mm.
What's very unfortunate, and what I see a lot of, unfortunately, unilaterally on the left side of the aisle, is a proclivity to search for the easiest common denominator. And what they look for is they try to find a way to say, oh, well, you are a part of X. Therefore, your mindset should also be X, not realizing that one's mindset should be far, far more nuanced than that. So
Mhm.
I think the reason people do what they do when it comes to political discourse is simply because they refuse to entertain the notion that they may be wrong. That is one part of it. And then part two is they are almost personally offended at the fact that someone does not conform to what their views of them should be, which honestly has a lot to do with the cultural rot that we've seen in our society of late.
Definitely. And that's something that has always that kind of thinking has always been something I never understood, because I have disagreed with many people in my life, and I've also learned from those people. The people that I disagree with, I learn from, and I try to see things from their perspective. I try to ask questions because I honestly just really enjoy and am very interested in the way that people think and their thought processes. So I've also come to the conclusion that not everyone is that way. People are very set in their ways. I have been very set in my ways before. I can be a stubborn person and think that I'm always right. And then I have to be reminded, or I'm reminded by a friend, mostly by God, most of the time, is that I need to be humble. I can't have all this pride in my heart because I'm not always right. And even though I'm conservative and we tend to think more logically, I believe our solutions are better solutions to our political challenges and our issues that we face in this country. I have to understand that while my way of thinking, I think, is more logical than another's, I also have to understand that I'm not always right about a certain thing. There are several different perspectives, and I'd say that I lean more moderate. I'm definitely very conservative, but I'm also more moderate and libertarian. And I think that I'm digressing, but what I'm trying to say is that if more people were able to have humility, and that knowing that, hey, maybe I'm not seeing this issue or this person in the way that they're perceiving themselves, or I'm not seeing this issue from a different perspective. Let me take a step back and try to see it differently. I don't think a lot of people attempt to challenge or don't challenge their way of thinking.
Yeah, and it's because we have adopted this mentality of team sports as it relates to politics, and that there can only be one right answer and one wrong answer.
Mm.
I'll give you an example. The police debate has been going on now for several years. And those on the left, many of them believe that defunding the police is the answer. And many on the right believe that defunding the police is not the answer, right? But it goes a little bit deeper than that. Let's look at actually, could there be a possible compromise between the two? Maybe, if both sides are committed to making sure that at the end of the day, that a positive comes out of it. So, for example, you can say, oh, we need to defund the police. And I would say, no, you probably don't. But then where we might agree is that, well, do police need better training? Probably. We can allocate more resources towards better training, which, by virtue of the fact that they are being better trained, may lead to a decrease in even these minuscule police civilian interactions that actually do boil over, like what the George Floyd situation was, and many others that we've seen. So maybe it could be tied to better funding or better training. But the thing is, if you operate unilaterally off of this presupposition that one person is going to be right and one person is going to be wrong,
Mhm.
then at the end of the day, what are you really arguing if you've already made your mind up? At that point, you are just merely trying to assert some sort of cognitive superiority over someone else.
Mhm.
And a lot of that actually is rooted in the notion of superiority in general, is that those on the left view themselves already as the most virtuous individuals. Therefore, everything that they think and the way they argue is going to conform to that notion they already have. People on the right, obviously, we also think that we're right, but the way in which many of us go about that is actually very much more nuanced, and I would argue much more conciliatory sometimes than
Mhm.
the approaches and the tactics of the left. So I think we have to get beyond the whole team sports mentality, black and white, right or wrong, and figure out, well, what are the little bits and pieces of your entire argument that we can possibly come together and agree on, instead of dismissing one's entire argument or one's entire stance out of hand preemptively, simply because you already have decided that that person is going to be wrong in your eyes.
Mhm. I completely agree with that. And Damani, I wanted to ask you too, why do you feel so passionately about informing people about politics? Why do you feel so passionately about fighting this culture war? Is there something else that would like to be doing other than, I don't want to use this word, but like influencing people through social media? Why do you feel so passionately about it?
Well, I think for me, it's because I've seen the damage that it can do, that the left can do when left unchecked. And I've seen the damage that the progressive movement can do if left unchecked. I've also seen the damage that the feminist movement can do if left unchecked. And part of it too is also being forward thinking. There's individuals out there right now who are realizing that the next generation is coming. And if we are going to have kids of our own one day, what sort of a world are we preparing for them right now? The
Mm.
reason I'm so passionate about it is because I've seen an exponential increase in the degeneracy of our culture as it stands today. And that degeneracy is what I'm seeing applauded. I'm talking about things like even the Grammys show that just happened a few days ago. We're seeing things that you would never dream would be deemed appropriate to be aired on national TV being dismissed as artwork or being lauded and praised by individuals. So when you see that become the status quo, you have two options. You can either choose to ignore or choose to engage. And the way
Mhm.
I look at it is the best outcome you can possibly have is if you choose to engage. Because if you continue turning the other cheek, metaphorically or even literally, at some point in time, you're going to run out of cheeks to turn. And at that point, you are going to become more or less of a punching bag for the individual with whom you disagree, because they're going to become more and more emboldened the less pushback they receive. So it is incumbent upon us to continue to push back and do so vociferously and also physically. It's very easy to sometimes just, post something online and say that's the end of it. But that goes beyond this. I have so much respect for people like yourself and Savannah and many others who actually take to the streets, because at the end of the day, you can be censored and silenced on social media all day long. Everybody knows this at this point. But you can't be censored in real life. You
Mhm.
really can't. So that is arguably the most power that you hold, is when you actually dare to go out into the world and confront the debauchery or degeneracy that you see with the truth, and do so in a way where you cannot be censored the way people try to censor you on social media. So I'm very passionate about it because I realize that this is an opportunity that we have. God has given us all gifts, and I believe that the gift of speaking publicly is one that He's given to me. And it is my job to use that for good and do so tirelessly. So that is why I do what I do, and I know that's the driving force behind why others do what they do as well, on the right side of the aisle.
Mhm. Mhm. Speaking of, not being censored in real life, do you remember that, so speaking of Savannah too, Savannah is a very bold person. Like, she's about my height, I'm 5'3", and she is just not scared to stand up for herself online or in person. I think when the shooting in Austin happened, I forgot the man's name who was shot, but, Savannah was covering, some Antifa riots, I think here in Austin or I don't know, somewhere in the country. She's been all over, and someone found out who she was in the crowd that she was covering, and they stole her phone, and they assaulted her. They literally assaulted her, and they tried to dox her. She's a small girl, and these people were just, like, ganging up against her because they found out that she was on InfoWars or she worked for InfoWars, and they physically assaulted her, and that's just really insane to think that just because she has a different opinion, people would physically assault someone based on their political ideology. Like, that is absolutely insane to me. And I don't think that anyone on the left can say, well, maybe not anyone. I don't want to make any generalizations, but it does not happen, or it would not happen to someone who is a leftist. Like, you can't imagine that someone who's a leftist would go into a Trump rally and be physically assaulted for standing up for what they believe in, because conservatives believe in freedom of speech and they honestly don't care. Like,
Yeah, and I know that there are some people who will point to those very rare instances, even back in 2016, where there were some Trump supporters who were assaulting leftist individuals. I am not going to necessarily give them a free pass. I will say, though, that typically the left is very brash and very inconsiderate when it comes to their shows of force or shows of support for a particular political entity. One instance that comes to mind is there was a certain Trump rally, I believe it was in Chicago, or somewhere around that area, where there was an individual who actually showed up to a Trump rally, obviously undercover, and then they chose to don a KKK hood, right? Yeah, I would argue that that is probably one of the few instances where some degree of force is more than warranted in that situation. It's because of the depraved nature of the so-called affront. So I can't, say that we never do it, but I can say that it is far, far less prevalent than when the left does it. And the left is also incredibly disingenuous because they claim to care about women, and they claim to want to amplify melanated voices, to borrow their own phrase. But then if there's someone like Savannah they disagree with, they are the first ones to assault that melanated voice. They're the first ones to not amplify but diminish her voice. They're the first ones to levy bodily force against them, and even threats of injury, just because of that differing opinion. And that goes to show the disparity between the two political groups on a more unilateral plane.
mhm, mhm, and I just think that the left is really fueled by anger, and I think that it starts off as passion, and that more deeply is from compassion. People who are on the left are more compassionate or deem themselves as more compassionate. And I think that whenever they see the news cycle and when someone is treated unfairly and unjustly, that compassion um, turns into anger. And rightly so. When someone is assaulted or someone is unjustly murdered, yeah, you're going to have compassion. And you're really not human if you don't have that kind of compassion and just knowledge that that is wrong. Like, we should all not be for this atrocity. And I think that they hang on to that emotion so much that they will not look at what's surrounding the incident that happens. And I'm not saying that, all the time, like, oh, anyone who's murdered or any atrocity that happens, there's more to the story, even though there is, and it's not what they think. I'm not sure if that made sense. What I'm trying to
Yeah.
say is, you know what I'm trying to say?
Well, I would posit this. I think that compassion is a good way to couch a lot of what the left internalizes and then turns around and acts upon. But what I would argue is that it is compassion that is veiled in, or not even veiled in, it's completely engulfed by an innate desire for self-aggrandizement.
You think
At the end
so?
of the day, a lot of individuals on the left, they want to be seen, they want to be heard, they want to have that viral moment, if you will. And they will go to increasingly dangerous lengths to do it. So I think that that is what they typically masquerade as, is they are the purveyors of compassion. But then at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, their most enjoyable moments are those moments when they're able to put down someone else and do so publicly, because they know that our mainstream media is going to cater to them anyway. So many
Mhm.
of them, they aspire to be part of the chaos in the background of the CNN reporter, because no one is telling them that they should do things any differently. Therefore, to them, it becomes almost a chance to achieve some sort of warped, degenerate stardom in their eyes. So they operate on that just because society has told them largely that they are free to do as they please if they are able to successfully masquerade their compassion or their
Mm.
outrage
Mhm.
as some sort of social justice cause.
Yeah, that's a really good point that you bring up, because I tend to give almost every person that I meet the benefit of the doubt. I try to, just see the good in people, very cliche. But I think that that is very true what you are saying, because just the other day I saw one of my friends on Facebook, who's also a girl that I went to college with, who had to put up this one filter on her profile picture that says, I choose to wear a mask after the Texas mask mandate was lifted. It's like, you, okay, does cool. Like, you are so virtuous, dude. Wow. I need to do better. I need to choose to wear a mask, and the way I'm gonna do it is gonna change my Facebook profile picture.
Yeah. Well, but you know what? It was really interesting about that point you bring up is we actually saw this behavior, because this was really nothing new when you stop and think about it. We saw this behavior sort of take off. I would argue maybe 8, 9 years ago, even on Facebook. And it began with whenever there was a social justice cause or whatever, then these filters would appear saying, oh, stop Coney 2012, or, oh, end this cause, end that cause, pray for France. And so we started to see that happen then. And on top of that, we started to also see the individuals who were marking themselves safe during events that really were not quite as earth shattering as people were led to believe. But they marked themselves safe. So at the end of the day, it was about, hey, look at me. Look at what I'm doing. It's not
Mhm.
about the cause. It's
Mhm.
about me, but I'm going to use the cause to garner more attention myself personally. Because for me, attention, either social attention or literal attention in the physical realm, is the end goal overall. So that's what they're always striving towards.
Mhm. No, that is very true. That is very true. We're that movement too of just seeking attention, wanting to be seen as more virtuous. Really, I mean, yeah, it's probably been going on for about 8 years, like you said. I didn't get into politics till I was about 16, and that was just dipping my toe in the water. Geez, the things that have happened since. 7 years ago. But anyway, yeah, there's this whole movement too of just wanting to this selfishness movement, like this whole self love, taking care of yourself. Um, I just think it's like I just don't think that it's helpful to the culture wars today because if everyone believes that oh I need to take care of myself more than other people, I really just need to practice self care, practice all these other things that make me feel good. I don't want to ever feel depressed, and it just makes other people. I don't know. I think that it makes people feel more empty than they already are. I'm very vehemently. How do you say that word? Vehemently.
Vehemently. Yeah.
Vehemently against the culture of self love, just because I don't even I'm just letting you into my brain a little bit. I don't even like to look at the mirror for too long because I don't want to see all the little things about my face or about my body. I don't want to see myself or glance at myself for too long for fear or out of fear that I'm going to become vain. That's actually one of my deepest fears is becoming vain. I always want to be humble. And I think that with this whole selfishness movement, people are all about displaying themselves in their best light. And social media doesn't help with it. Social media doesn't help with like, oh, look at this really dope picture. I look really good in this picture and look at all the likes that I've gotten and, so on and so forth with the accomplishments that we all achieve and we have to show everyone. It's just, eh, I just don't think that it's good. It's honestly very prideful and not turning people, or it's turning people away from humility, which we all desperately need.
It's all a mirage. Very, very, very well said, Mika. It's all a mirage. And there was a phrase that people used to use, and it was keeping up with the Joneses, right?
Hmm.
We're seeing the manifestation of that now here in the physical realm on social media as people go out of their way to try to keep up with other people or show this accomplishment or that accomplishment. Not to say those accomplishments are not worthy of merit, but at the end of the day, it's encouraging you to show a false image of yourself. Now, when I went through, it was a 6 month Instagram shadow ban I actually just came out of a few weeks ago. And while I went through that, I actually had to really gut check myself. So at the end of the day, I was actually grateful it actually happened because I realized that to a certain degree, vanity metrics will make you go crazy. Metrics like, oh, how many likes did I get? How many views did I get? If you're obsessed over that only and not the message of what you're actually trying to convey, then you will become lost in this never ending social merry-go-round where people are always searching for the next hit. It becomes really like a drug. So when you have a culture that's become so accustomed to only presenting one side of themselves, then it does leave people more empty afterwards. Because as soon as they post, oh, that dope picture you just mentioned earlier, oh, well, guess what? They're going to start thinking now, okay, well, what's the next picture going to be like? What's the next post going to look like? How can I get more engagement and more attention for my next post than the one before that? If you care about the message, the likes are just a nice side benefit. If you care about the likes more than the message, though, then you have a problem.
Mhm. Mhm. I've honestly fallen prey to that before, just trying to be perceived as something better than I actually am inwardly. I think that it's something that women predominantly struggle with is just our appearance. I think we struggle a lot with insecurities, and I think the statistics show it. And I wish I would have thought of the statistic to bring up, but essentially, young girls, the rate in young girls suicide rates are exponentially higher from the time that social media began to, take off. I think it was around 7, 8 years ago, actually, when Instagram was first established. And I've seen this one article about how people are more depressed than they've ever been, especially last year, discounting, last year's events, if you will. Um, and yeah, vanity just leaves people empty. And yeah, I don't know. I lose my train of thought a lot, but I just wanted to leave with that message is that vanity leaves people empty. This is where I was gonna get with. This is where I was gonna go with. I used to really care about the likes that I got on social media, even though it wasn't real, and it honestly has it disabled me from being authentic with friends and even family. It's something that I still struggle with just because I feel like my voice is not heard properly unless it's perfect. And that is straight up not true. It's okay for me to be vulnerable, and I'm slowly learning that. And I think that people need to learn that also, that, you don't have to be perfect on the outside in circles, in your social circles or on social media.
Yeah, no, it's a lesson everyone needs to learn, because we are led to believe that how you present yourself online is who you are. And that's not the case. It's really interesting. I actually met someone a couple months ago down here in Houston. And when we first met for the very first time, she indicated to me that she thought that I was going to be just all about politics, just by virtue of the persona that I gave off online. And she was pleased to realize there's much more to me. I like to work out, I like to read, I like to cook, I like to bake. I love watching movies and doing fun, random things. So all that is a part of who you are. But when you are living through a social media tinged lens and seeing the world through that lens, then instead of showing off everything about yourself and who you are concerned with, oh, well, if I post a picture of me looking really cool in this shot, it's going to get more attention than a picture of me reading a book and just showing what I'm actually doing. So what do we choose to do? We go with the mode that is going to deliver that next dopamine hit.
Mm.
And if you live based off of that as the primary goal, then you become, in essence, a drug addict. And the drug is just social media. And all you're looking for is that next hit. And you will go to increasingly desperate lengths to accomplish that. And it's a very sad byproduct of the social media landscape we see today.
Definitely. Definitely. Thank you for going down that little tangent with me. Um, there's there's this other question that I wanted to ask you, Dee. So conservatives are losing the culture war. How do we fight back effectively and, try to persuade people who disagree with us, and try to not have them or coerce them, but to really understand where we're coming from and maybe change their minds or see an issue in a different light? How do we fight that culture war?
But no, I wouldn't say that we're losing per se. What I would say is that the illusion that we have lost has been very firmly ingrained in the average American's consciousness. Everywhere you turn on in any of our media forms, whether that be music or whether that be movies or entertainment, we are led to believe that our views are in the minority. That is the reason why so many individuals have chosen to actually build their own social media platforms and really begin to coalesce around each other. So to answer your question, I think that really is the answer, is to begin to pool our own resources and at least be able to lift up a viable and powerful alternative to much of the dribble that we see on our mainstream media today. The mainstream media, honestly, they themselves, they know that their views are not the views of the majority, but they also know that their views are expertly crafted to appear as reasonable glance, if you will.
Hmm.
So when they know that that is the illusion they create, then naturally they're going to attract more people to their message, by using their own metrics. But there's lots of individuals out there who, when you turn off the TV and when you're forced to confront your own individual ideas, you are more apt to not be as hard of a leftist as the mainstream media would lead you to believe. But so goes the mainstream media and how powerful it really is. I think that the best way for us to be able to counteract that is to simply, if you have certain skills in a certain area, you need to get with other people who can actually help bolster those skills, or other people who are skilled differently, to come together, form a conglomerate of some sort, and a way where you are not just one person anymore fighting against the mainstream media machine and fighting this culture war, but where you are a unified front. That is one area where the right has struggled for a very long time. They do not present that unified front that a lot of leftists do. No matter how crazy or how off the wall a leftist position is, When they pick a position, they all stick together, link arms, and will not allow that line to be bent whatsoever. But on the
Mhm.
right, we have a lot of individuals, unfortunately, who've chosen to be more milk toast in their public or private stances, and that's led to us being where we're at today. So I think if we are to move forward and actually start to get some wins in this culture war, because we'll get wins in small battles. We get wins when there are individuals who release a new conservative rap album that is clean and open for all to listen to. We win when that is number one on the charts. We
Mhm.
win when we lift up a conservative entity that has come under fire. We win by virtue of our collective strength in realizing that collective strength and then moving and operating off of that strength. So I think that's how we have to start.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that is a really good strategy. I think I really hadn't seen it that way before. And I think that I hadn't seen it that way before because, I'm, you know, just a person with, I don't know, with followers who I've known since like high school, middle school, elementary school, where you have a much bigger circle of, really, not really, but just more prominent people in your sphere. So what I see in my sphere has kind of clouded me to see different realities or different perspectives, such as your own. And what I mean by that is that on in my world, I see myself as one of probably 5 conservative voices among, my peers. So, it seems to me that everyone else seems to be on board with this neo-democratic party leftist movement. So, when I say that conservatives are losing the culture war, it's because in my own world, that's what I'm seeing, but maybe that's not the reality of it. So, that was a really good point to bring up.
Well, you feel that the reason you feel that way is purposeful. And it's because, unfortunately, a lot of conservatives for a very long time now have been cowed into a sort of de facto silence, where they have chosen to accept the lie that their views are the minority, where in reality they are anything but. And then when there are groups of militant leftists who endlessly and tirelessly police the socio-political landscape, they police your social media landscape, they're always there. It makes you feel as if you are losing, but perception is not reality. So one of the best things that I learned over this journey, ever since I started becoming more outspoken on social media, starting around 2016, I would say 2016, 2017, is the number of people that I will call friends the rest of my life that I met or was exposed to just because I had the wherewithal to put my own self out there for better or for worse and see what happens. So the more people take that first step, I mean the steps that you've taken to start this podcast, this YouTube channel, this is a huge step for you because every time you are able to produce something new, there's eyes that are going to be on it, and those people will be incentivized to share that content, and then your network will grow. It has to grow because there are so many people out there who think just like we do. And the thing for us is it almost becomes a scavenger hunt. You have to actually go out and find them because they're there. It's like they're waiting to hear that beacon, if you will. They're waiting to see that light on the lighthouse come around and say, okay, I know there's a thinking person over there, but they won't see it if your light's dark. So our goal is to keep our lights on, and that is both a metaphor for the way we should live and honestly an example of how we should let our light shine the way Jesus Christ commands us to.
Mhm. Amen. Speaking of, it's funny, you kind of read my mind. The last question that I wanted to ask you was politics aside, most times politics really drains my energy and gets me exhausted, but I wanted to ask you a faith question. How has knowing Jesus and pursuing him daily changed the way you see the world, the way you see yourself, and the way you see him?
I think it's given me peace. You know, we hear the phrase "peace that passes all understanding" all the time. At least I did growing up. And I think living intentionally as an ambassador for Christ is one of the most personally rewarding things you could ever do. And the reason I say that is because there are so many things in this world that are meant to distract and divert our attention. It's very easy to take your eye off of the eventual prize. For myself personally, and I'm not perfect. I know I need to shore up my own spiritual walk in many ways myself. There's personal things that happen in your personal life that sometimes can get in the way of that. But I would say that having that knowledge to fall back on, being raised in a household where being a Christian was that was the religion of the home. And my parents were strong Christians, and they encouraged us to commit scripture to memory. And I find that as such a useful tool now, because now when I think about the world around me, there's always, 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 always a Bible verse or a scriptural excerpt, if you will, that I can apply to my current situation. Speak the truth in love, love thy neighbor as thyself. All these things are things that have been in this Bible for thousands of years. And if you actually just apply them, extract them from the pages and internalize them and then live them out personally, that's what I believe is what allows me to do what I do so confidently. And also the knowledge that doing so is not necessarily going to earn you any sort of fame or accolades. If you look at the early Christians, they were persecuted to the nth degree. Many of them died horrible deaths just because they chose to actually stand for their beliefs and stand for their faith. And if there's anything we should take away from that, is that if they had that much conviction to still hold firm and not cave in their own beliefs, then it is imperative that we have at least half of that drive and determination to make sure that our values are upheld moving forward. So that's how it's worked out for me pretty well so far. And I struggle, and there's days where it's not the easiest thing in the world to do what I do. But at the end of the day, it's not about pleasing people here on this earth. It's about pleasing the big man upstairs. And if I do that, I'm happy.
Hmm. Very well said. Very well said. Um, well, that was really the last question that I wanted to ask you. Damani, thank you so much for joining me this evening and just always having a great conversation and letting me pick your mind. I always love whenever we get a chance to hang out and just have these intellectual conversations.
We need a lot more of them in this world. But thank you so much for having me, Mika. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to continuing to watch you grow.
Thanks to you. Well, I will see you soon, sir. All right.
Sounds like a plan.
Bye.
Take care.
Thanks, Charlie.